Hey everyone, welcome to YOUmedia Miami's virtual podcast for Friday, May 8th. This is presented by the Miami-Dade Public Library System. My name is Colin.
Hey everyone, my name is Vinny, specialist at North Dade.
And hey, my name is Shamir.
All right, it's your boy Xavier. I'm excited. I'm just excited.
My name is Khalil.
Great, and we have a really exciting special guest with us today. He's from the Great White North. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Frank Kinesic, I guess. I am a video game developer for the last 10 or so years, and a podcaster, which is more of a hobby than a profession.
Don't sell yourself short, man. You guys are raking in the big dough with the podcast these days.
We're doing okay. It's a lot of fun. So it's more about it is nice to get some money generated from that, but for a long time it was just, for fun, hanging out, stuff like that.
Fantastic. Well, cool. We have a lot of great questions today. We've worked with all of our teams to come up with some really cool questions that are on their mind about, what it is like to be a video game developer and designer and programmer, as well as being a podcaster. So I'm going to jump really quick into our first question that we have for us. And we wanted to know, we've all been kind of, dealing with, what's going on right now with, the coronavirus and the quarantine and everything. So we wanted to know, just off the top, how have you been doing, with the quarantine and everything? And, what have you been doing to pass the time? Have you been playing a lot of video games?
I have been playing a lot of video games, more than I ever have in my life. So, I've got a few platinums under the belt on PlayStation. I'm into trophies and achievements, if you didn't know. So what have I played? I platinumed Fallen Order, which I had beaten already on Xbox, which like quite a bit. I'm currently on my hard run, which I already talked about before, on Final Fantasy VII Remake on Chapter 17.
I heard that's really good.
Playing a lot of that, yeah. There's a couple other major ones that I played. I went through Hellblade, platinum that, and there's one other major one, but I can't remember right now. But yeah, I've got a list. I'm just kind of making my way through it, and I'm usually very busy, so I'm definitely taking advantage of the time to play a lot of video games.
Nice.
And doing some research and learning as well with video game development, looking into some new Unity stuff and watching movies, house stuff, cleaning the house, doing yard work. Although it's actually snowing here today. I think this is the latest it's ever snowed in Canada. So
I think we probably have some teens in here that may have never seen snow before in their life. Khalil and Xavier, have you guys seen snow before? You have?
Yes, I have.
Oh my gosh.
I was born up north.
Oh.
And so basically it snowed even in the summer. So that was fun. But I was only like 2 years old, and then I moved to Maryland. And that was the first time I actually experienced snow where I actually remember it. But yeah, it was fun. Snow is fun.
Nice.
Awesome. I have a question. Since our space is for ages 14 and 19, majority of them are in high school. What advice would you give to these students who's interested in a career in video game development or programming, but they don't really know where to begin or start?
Yeah, there's not really one answer, but the first thing you need to do is find out what part you like the most, I would say. So, there's lots of people who have interest across the board, but, does art interest you? Does design interest you? Does programming interest you specifically? I think it's worth, even if you're not great at some of those things, like investigating them to see, getting some knowledge about them or what you like the most about video games, because there's lots of different ways to go. Even audio kind of gets neglected a lot too. And although a lot of audio professions are just kind of audio engineers, they could do any type of audio, but have a passion for video games. So I'm not an audio expert by any means, but that definitely seems to be an area where, we're looking for talent for stuff like that. But I mean, first, yeah, try to find out what you like. Programming, I would say, math is really important. Math, computer programming, specifically linear algebra, which I was my least favorite math subject, although I still liked it. But I mean, that's the stuff I use literally daily, understanding that math. So I know a lot of people say, what am I going to use this for? Why am I learning this with certain math stuff? But I do use it every day. So it depends what you want to do, but it is good to know. Even artists have some basic idea of math, and coordinate systems is really useful for using different software and understanding and, you know, figuring out problems or solutions to problems. And start looking at that stuff and taking courses, whether it's art, design. There's not a lot you can do. I would say probably in high school, maybe English to some degree, just in terms of narrative, world building, story, stuff like that can help. Although you I don't technically need that stuff to be a good designer, but it doesn't hurt. But yeah, I would focus. I would not neglect math. Would be the biggest thing, unless you're specifically an artist and that's what you want to do. And programming definitely helps. And another thing, not just in school or classes you take in school, but like there's so many tutorials now on YouTube and stuff like that. Like you can learn how to do anything. And I mean, I talk about Unity a lot, and I use Unity, which is a game engine, which a lot of indie developers use, and it's been improving over the years. I started using it 6 or 7 years ago, and it's come a really long ways. So if you are interested, I would say, download Unity, and there's tutorials online, and just try one. Depending on your level of experience, you might need a little programming background and fundamentals, but there's different ranges of tutorials and what you can do. And I always kind of tell younger people, download Unity, try a tutorial. There's stuff that's out there for free, for gauging your interest and stuff like that.
Cool. That's awesome. All right, Frank. So, question I want to ask you is, what ultimately inspired you to make a decision to pursue a career in video game development, and what pushed you in that direction?
Okay, so it's almost a different world now from when I did it, in the sense that there are college programs, university programs dedicated to video game, all the different disciplines of video games, which didn't really exist when I was graduating high school. So I was really into math and sciences, and I went to school for mathematics to university. And I think my goal was probably to become a teacher at that point. I kind of went into computer programming in school and graduated with math with a specialization in computer programming, and just went to become a programmer, basically doing call center applications and stuff like that out of school. Video games was kind of not even like conceptually a possibility at that point to me. I didn't know how to approach it. It's not like today with kind of programs and career paths for that kind of stuff. So I went to work there, and my lead, we became friends, and her husband worked at a video game company, which was literally 20 minutes away from where I lived. And I'd kind of heard of it, but I didn't really know that much about it. So we became friends, and through talking to them, and another friend of mine, his brother worked at this company too. So kind of through knowing them, and I obviously had a passion for video games. I played video games my whole life, and math and science and computers. So I was definitely interested in it, and I was not that passionate about the job I had at the time. So I, kind of took the chance and got in there, and really haven't looked back since. So I kind of got lucky. It's, I didn't plan on doing it. Maybe if I knew it was a possibility, I would have. So, but now there's a lot more competition. You really need to find ways to separate yourself and build your skills all the time. So yeah, I kind of got lucky, and just through a passion for video games and mathematics ended up there. And I was lucky that there was a company so close to where I live too. Like it was just, I mean, looking back at it, kind of pure luck and maybe fate to some degree. I don't know. So yeah, that's how I got there, and I've kind of stayed in the industry since. And that was a AAA place, worked in it for a long time, and then went to indie companies over time as well.
That's funny. We've heard that story time and time again. We've interviewed people about how, you know, like you kind of have to like know people, and like luck plays so much of a factor in it.
Networking is a huge factor. So at least in our area, there's lots of like social events. They're not like that frequent, but and even in Toronto, which is probably about an hour and a half from where I live, lots of meetups and communities for discussing game development and stuff like that. So I would seek those out as early as you can. Get to know people. Networking is a huge factor, and also skill, of course. But yeah, having connections and is a really, well, I wouldn't say it's not a skill, but it will definitely help you get work. I wouldn't say it would limit your ability to make or do anything on your own.
I think this is true of any job. You know, make sure to ingratiate yourself to the people around you, and make sure to make good connections with those people. And keep those connections strong as throughout your entire career. I think it's always good advice for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Do any of our teens want to ask a question at this point? Khalil or Xavier, you have one ready to go?
Yeah, this one is concerning your development in video games, because I saw that you helped with Skylanders.
Yes.
And the thing that amazed me with that game was how you were able to take like the piece, and place it on this little pad, and the piece would transfer to the actual screen, and you were able to play that character.
Mm-hmm.
And that, honestly, when it first came out, it amazed me. Like, I was like, wow, that's crazy. And so what I wanted to know was, how would you use that programming or that art to like project it to the screen?
Okay, so I don't know too much about the actual like physical technology. To what I know, there is like some chip on the toy that stores information, and it stores basic stats. Like if you take that toy to a different system, it stores like the level of it, what abilities you've unlocked. I think probably an ID or a number that represents you as like your ID on whatever. Probably not. There's probably a unique ID for that on that, but it's storing a small amount of information. The pedestal you put it on is, it can read that, and all the characters are basically in the game already. Everything about them, like anything you could possibly do, is stored as data on the game disc, and it's just kind of loading and unlocking things based on that simple connection. And when we're play testing the game, so we were working remotely. I didn't work. We had a contract working on that game, and we never had any toys, right? You kind of have debug or like helper programs that you just load whatever character you want, and you don't need the toys to unlock that stuff. The toys are kind of a key lock system for people at home and players to use. So it is a really cool technology. It's kind of like had its wave of popularity and come back down a bit, but it is pretty cool. And I mean, I'm looking at a lot of amiibos right now, which I haven't unboxed. And also I have some Skylanders I was curious when I was working on the game and started playing a little bit. But we worked mostly for the game I worked on, Skylander Superchargers. It was converting they have this idea that any toy you've ever bought, you can use on any version of the game, right? So they had to, and that one, they were going to make it an online version of the game. So you could play the game online, co-op and stuff like that, which was the first one that had done that. So they had a team dedicated with myself and people actually spread across the United States and Canada, not a huge team, but people were all over the place, of making all the old characters that were never functional online, getting them to work online. And that was really challenging because, each character, like each game is separated by a year or so of release, and their technology is improving with every version of the game. So each character was like their own little kind of puzzle figuring out how to do it. You had to do different techniques, and yeah, it was a really, you know, interesting, different project. So that was just about a year or so I worked on that, but it was fun.
Great.
Thank you. I really needed that because like it amazed me, like the art and the coding behind it
Yeah,
for the actual figure. And I'm like, hold on, wait a minute. This dude worked in Skylanders. I might actually get to get that off my chest. Like it puzzled me for a good minute when I was younger how you're able to get an action figure onto the screen.
it does feel a bit like magic. I think that's part of the appeal
Yeah.
for younger kids for sure.
Thank
Great.
you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Khalil,
Yeah, I had a question planned. So I understand that like obviously once you like start to get start to learn how to program and stuff, like that's you have to like build it up like over time. You have to get better at programming. But what I wanted to know was how do you keep your programming skills like fresh in between, like even if you're not developing like working on a game, how do you keep them stable or like grow them?
Yeah, well, when I'm working, you're kind of always doing something. So even if you're not working on a project, you're probably developing a prototype for something or ideas and like doing a small version of a game, and you've always got something new. Maybe you know, you made a game and you wrote some system, you programmed a system, and you think, well, this system we could use for other games. It's not just for this game. We could kind of make it generic and use it for other stuff. So you might rewrite that system, and anytime you write something in code, by the time you're done, you're usually like, I could do that a lot better if I had to write it the second time. Like you've encountered all the problems. So, you know, you kind of re-engineer the system or fix all the issues that you had with it, or just, you know, research. I mentioned Unity. So Unity is constantly changing and evolving. So I like was doing tutorials and watching videos on some of their new systems and their data-oriented tech stack yesterday, and working on stuff like that. So I guess kind of trying to educate yourself. There's not always a lot of time for that, so it really depends. But and I mean, there's a world of programming stuff that I know nothing about, right? Like everyone has their specializations and stuff like that, where I've kind of been mostly a gameplay programmer, like working on translating the controller into animations and movement and stuff like that, and playing animations and effects and that kind of stuff, menus to some degree as well. That's kind of the stuff I've done the most of. And it's a little tough sometimes to break outside of that, but I try to when I can. But there's usually always something new that you have to look into. And a lot of the times you learn by having a problem you have to solve. So you have some difficulty or something. I have no idea how to solve this. I don't know what to do. And your only way out is to like do research, figure out the best way to solve those problems, right? So working usually leads to learning as well. So you're just kind of adding new tools, and you know, teammates help a lot too. So they teach you new things, and they have skills you don't have, and you know, you want to be constructive, and you know, no one wants to be too harsh or mean working in teams. So you all want to be there to support each other. So you know, helping each other out and learning from other people you work with is a huge factor as well. So teamwork and communication, no matter what area of video games you're in, is crucial. And you know, a lot of the times people might not be the best skilled for a job. Like they have the skills, but they might not be the best. And personality and communication is a huge factor for working in video games, because you're never working in a silo. You know, you've always got a team. As a programmer, I have to take work from artists, integrate it, animators, writers, audio. We all work together to put to put everything into the game. So you're never by yourself. Teamwork, communication, huge part of the games industry.
Cool. I want to follow up on that with the question that we talked about with our teens earlier about. So you mentioned teamwork, and that's definitely a tenet for a lot of jobs. So you've worked previously. You mentioned coming out of that other job, and taking your first career position, I guess, in the industry, working with Silicon Knights, and that's a AAA developer.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've also worked some time in independent. So can you talk a little bit about the differences of what that work life is like?
Yeah, I mean, generally the AAA is, in terms of your work, typically much more focused, and you're going to start at a lower level, doing entry level work and stuff like that, and working your way up, so to speak. And as you get better, you get put on bigger projects, maybe become a lead, who knows, maybe change paths completely. You might go from programmer artist into production or something, and people move. But whatever you're doing, it's typically very specialized. And the money's typically a bit better. It's less risky, benefits, stuff like that. It has its advantages as well. Probably much less creative influence, right? But I don't want people to think that there's no creativity, because whatever you're working on, you should be putting whatever you can into that system, even if it's a small system like I've worked on in the past. Like, how do I make that system as good as it can be, right? So, but at an indie studio, you're going to be like the last indie studio I worked on, our artist, he did animation, graphic design, menus, map painting stuff. Like, he would do all areas of art, right? So he needed to know a little bit about everything and have the skills, where in a studio, you would probably typically just, you're a modeler for assets for the environment, or you assemble assets to build an environment, or you work on characters specifically, or you're just an animator. So specialization versus a multifaceted approach is probably the biggest difference in terms of your skill set. And what I loved about the indie industry is just that ability to control what you're working on and have influence over it in a small team, right? You discuss it, you have different ideas, and you can put your vision into the game, where you might not have as much ability to do that in a big company. But I should say also, like, I started as a programmer on the last indie game I worked on. I still did programming, but I was more of a design role. Like, I designed the levels of the game and the bosses and puzzles and stuff like that. So I love design as well. I think I like it a little more than programming, and programming is a great skill to have, even if you want to be a designer. So whatever's in your head and you have ideas for designs, you can implement them yourself, right? You can put that vision into practice on your own.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, Frank, we have a message from a teen. He just mentioned that he couldn't join today's podcast, but he sent me his question. And one of them what were some of your favorite video game titles growing up? And what are some of your video game titles currently?
Okay, my favorites growing up were, let me think. Super Mario World was definitely a favorite. Super Metroid, Banjo-Kazooie.
Oh, that's nice. Those are great games.
What are a few other ones? I feel like I'm missing. There's lots of games I played, but those are probably my favorites. I have a retro game collection here. I'm just looking over for inspiration.
Do you have Earthbound?
I do not. I've actually never played it.
You should get
I played it a bit. I'm getting more into RPGs though, so I might at some point.
Yeah, that's probably my favorite RPG that I've ever played. It's really good.
Nice.
Like,
you should check out. My friend of mine worked on a game that's kind of in the spirit of Earthbound. They were inspired by Earthbound, called Citizens of Earth. It's like a 2D RPG that, you know, you could check out if you're into Earthbound. It's not exactly the same, but they were definitely inspired by that game when making it.
Cool.
Mega Man 2 for sure. I have to put on the list.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yep, perfect.
Lil is waking up now. I see.
And in terms of my current favorite games, I'm kind of skipping a whole generation, but to me, Horizon Zero Dawn is my favorite game. To me, it's almost perfect in a lot of ways. Xavier's loving it. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I think on the one podcast I listened to some of, he was currently playing Spider-Man. Were you playing Spider-Man?
And I beat it, and I love it because my specialty, because I play all types of games. I'm versatile. I go everywhere.
That's
my
a main too. Like playing lots of different genres, especially if you want to be a designer, play different genres, because you don't know what company you're going to work at, what genre game they're going to make. You don't always get to pick exactly what you want to do. So getting experience with different genres, and I develop appreciations. And I mean, part of design and current video game design is, you know, combining genres and using influence. I mean, every game, it's funny you say Spider-Man. There's an article I talk about a lot it was on CNET called Spider-Man Video Game, the Video Game. And you can look it up. It's like an opinion piece that all of these PlayStation games are very similar. They have skill trees, open world map, like a lot of stuff. They're almost the same, where these games are all, I mean, clearly influenced by RPGs of the past and stuff like that as well, but they're becoming the same thing in a way. And I always like to have discussions, is this a good or a bad thing? That they're all very similar. I don't care. I like it. It doesn't bother me. Each game is typically bringing something extremely unique to the table. I think you had talked about swinging in Spider-Man as well. And again, that's the cool, unique thing that game brings to the table. So I think, you know, every game is bringing something new. So I like that approach, but playing different genres is key, and they influence other genres and incorporate different things. Anyway, that's a tangent. Next, other games but Horizon Zero Dawn came out at the same time as Breath of the Wild, and they're very similar, but I prefer Horizon just because I like direction in games. A lot of like people who like to explore on their own would like Breath of the Wild more. I like the game to tell me what's fun about it and tell me what I should be doing, because I don't have a lot of time and I play a lot of games, so I want a directed experience more. But that's totally a personal opinion, right? And people play games for lots of different reasons. Just because I think a game's good, I mean, I don't get other games, but I mean, I totally get why other people like them. And one thing I love is I always want someone who loves a game that I don't like to like explain to me why it's great. Sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. But even games I don't get at first, I eventually, I get it. I get what people are talking about. And another game like that, I didn't get into Dark Souls. I tried many times and Bloodborne, but the first Souls-like game I really got into was Neo, and I think I've played that game more than any other game in my life. But as a result, I ended up playing Sekiro as well, and that's something I platinumed recently. That took a lot of work, and I now have a huge appreciation for that genre and those games. So Sekiro is definitely up there as like the past 2 years, probably my favorite game of the last 2 years. So Horizon, Mario Galaxy, I love. Oh, not Mario Galaxy, sorry, Mario Odyssey is one of my favorites. And is there any other one? Oh, God of War, I loved as well. I mean, I really love Naughty Dog games too. I think Uncharted 1 has a special place in my heart because the reviews were not that great for it. And everyone where I worked had an Xbox 360 and not a PlayStation 3 because it was like so expensive at the time, like $600 or $700 Canadian. And I had got one and I played Uncharted and I was just blown away by like the details of animation. And I'm like, why is no one talking about this game? This is amazing. And now like it is super popular. So I love Naughty Dog games as well. So I'm excited for Last of Us Part 2, very much so.
we've been watching the trailer and kind of blown away that that's even possible on PlayStation 4.
Yeah.
So maybe you can tell us how that's even possible. Some sort of voodoo is happening.
That is outside the scope of my knowledge. But they have very talented artists and programmers at that company.
Yeah. So I want to follow up on this because I think you were talking a little bit about like design, right? So you're like, I don't like this, like Dark Souls, like the design of it just doesn't feel good to me, versus like the design of this does feel good to me.
Sorry, it's not necessarily that. With Dark Souls, I didn't get it at first, and
okay.
Like people get it, and it just took me like trying Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and then finally Neo was more combat focused, like offensive rather than defensive, and I think I just needed something to pull me in to that world a bit more that I could relate to. Like I like action games primarily, so that got me into it and made me understand it. So the thing with gamers too is like sometimes you can't play everything. Now that I'm older, I have a job, I can buy the games I want and stuff like that. But when you're younger, it's tough to do that. So, I mean, you're at a library, so that's good. Hopefully there's lots of games you can try there. But I also highly recommend stuff like Xbox Game Pass. And I haven't tried PlayStation Now too much, but, as a way of trying lots of games at a pretty reasonable price. So I'm big fans of stuff like that. Anyway, sorry, your follow-up.
So I want to ask, I mean, I used to work like a long time ago. I worked in the movie industry, and we made movie trailers. I remember talking to an editor when we went to a movie one time, and he was like, "Oh, I know how they do it. You can sort of see how the sausage is made." You know what I'm saying? So, like, as a developer, does that change the way that you experience video games? You're like, "Oh, I see what they're doing here. I see the tricks that they're employing here." And
it definitely like changes the way I play games. So a huge part of gaming and design is teaching. Okay. So you are teaching your player how to play the game, and you have to incrementally, add challenge, add ideas in the right order. And that is like the art of design, right? Like this trail of breadcrumbs, so to speak, getting the player, building their skills to where you want them to be. And as a designer, I can see what's intended to be those. I also get frustrated because if I get to a part in a game where I don't know what to do, I always say like, I don't feel like they taught me how to do that properly. And sometimes I look back or I watch a video or look up on some forum what I'm doing wrong. And I'm like, oh, I should have known that. They did teach me that. That's my fault. I take the blame. But other times I'm like, yeah, I had no idea that I was supposed to do that. And every gamer is different. Some people want a little more hand holding, so to speak, and other people want to experience it for themselves. So that's my take on it, I guess. But I definitely see the design side a lot more, and you kind of develop designer brain from playing a lot of games and working on games, and it helps understanding systems and like getting good at games. But there's still games I'm terrible at, so who knows.
Yeah, I find when I was working there before, making trailers and everything, you'd eventually see those things. So I figured it would probably be the same for you as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Obviously, programming not so much. Like you're kind of in wonder of, but you don't get to see the guts. Like you can't interpret what a coding system is when you're playing. So more for design. And artists, I'm sure always, at least the artists I know, are dissecting it, like maybe pausing a game or playing it and saying, what did they do here? What techniques are they using? And they're really good at figuring out how they achieved cool effects in games. And you'd be surprised how much is kind of smoke and mirrors in games too. Like things just disappear, but there's an effect that covers it up, and probably similar to movie making and other types of production. Kind of the magic when you're really looking for stuff, you can see lots of seams in the game, which is fun.
That's awesome. So Frank, kind of piggybacking on what you said on how being in the back end, you're able to really see when experiencing video games now, like you kind of could see like every aspect, what has been the most challenging aspects in video game design for you?
Okay, this is a good one. So as a designer, making puzzles to me is the hardest thing by far. So coming up with a puzzle and working within the limitations of budget to make puzzles is a huge challenge. So uh, puzzles are the hardest thing. And you can have a team of 10 people trying to come up with ideas for puzzles, and you just can't come up with anything. It needs like some kind of inspiration. You need to look to other games for inspiration sometimes. But great puzzles tend to be unique in some way. So puzzle development for me is the hardest. The most important thing is, like I said, teaching. And you might think something makes sense, and you give it to someone to play and they don't know what to do. So the other most difficult part, or the most important part to me, is like play testing. The more you can play test, the better. So if you see watching someone play a game can be very painful. So you've made a game, you go to a trade show and people play it and they're stuck on something, or you thought something was obvious and you have to say, oh, you need to do this. If I have to tell that to someone, I feel like I failed as a game designer. Right. So getting that just right, where it's not too obvious versus the player is discovering for themselves, is what I find to be like the hardest thing to do, to get that exactly right. And I think that's somewhat universal. Like the best designed games fit that perfectly. So Portal is usually the classic example of something that it gives you just enough information, and the progression of information is just right, that you have that sense of accomplishment and learning all at once. So finding that perfect trajectory of skill and learning is the toughest thing. But you can fail in other ways too. If you plan your game for experienced gamers, and then you find out, kids actually really like the artwork, or it appeals to a different target audience than you were thinking, it's probably too hard for them, and you were designing your game for the wrong people the whole time. So there's so much you learn, and the more questions you can answer early on, the better off you can be with designing games.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Xavier, Khalil, do you have any other follow-ups you want to ask at this point about game design?
Not really, I think.
Okay.
Shoot. Well, there was one question, like, as far as like coming up with the game and having like the things you need for it, the artwork, the aesthetic, the background, the lore. And I wanted to know, like, out of all of those things, what is the best ingredient for a good game?
I'm not big on story, and I'm not, but this is different for everyone. Some people play games for the stories. For me, it is the design aspect. So there's games with very simple graphics, trivial graphics in some cases, that are still great experiences to me, because
like Minecraft.
Yeah, or like there's a game called Thomas Was Alone or something like that. It's literally just cubes, right? And when we prototype mechanics, so if we don't, obviously you don't have art yet, right? There's this idea in video games, this concept of iterative development, where when you're, for example, Embers of Miriam, the first prototypes we did with that game was literally a cube, a big cube that split up into two smaller cubes, and we prototyped all the controls with that. And you'll make sure something feels good and is fun without any art at all. So I'm not saying art's not important. It's a huge factor. I love art, but you kind of try to prove your ideas without art. And then in the case with our game, we thought, okay, what is this mechanic about, and what kind of story and art would lend itself well to it? And there's different approaches to doing that. Other people come up with worlds first and then come up with design after. So there's no real right or wrong thing to me. But in terms, let's say the art side, let's just go to the art side. Which side do I feel is most important? I think environment, like environment art, is what draws me into the worlds the most. So that's my favorite thing about world building is environment art and lighting. Lighting is such an underrated factor in games as well.
Yeah, I think lighting is huge. I think we're even seeing that. I don't know if you saw the Xbox reveal or the thing from the other day, and then The Last of Us as well. And I think the lighting is really what is the difference between the really amazing graphics at this point and lesser.
For the last 10 years or so, poly counts and models have been really high already. Texture quality is superb. So I've always kind of been saying lighting, real-time lighting is going to be one of the biggest factors, and like effects are coming a long way too. And lit effects really change. Like the effects in Final Fantasy VII Remake are ridiculous. They're so good.
Do you think that because a lot of our kids are maybe they're not necessarily interested in video game coding or the design aspect of it, but they are interested in photography or filmmaking and that type of thing, are there career paths for those type of people? Because I'm thinking about lighting right now as like a cinematographer and things like that.
I'm sure big studios have people who are exclusively in charge of lighting, and people. I mean, Jay, who he at a AAA company like Silicon Knights, he was basically a cinematographer for the game, right? He placed cameras and worked with cameras and cinematics and stuff like that. So there are definitely roles for stuff like that. I'd say they're probably at bigger companies, but yeah, I mean, games now have huge budgets for cinematics and motion capture and stuff like that. So anyone with those types of skills, I'm sure could find roles in the industry in bigger companies. Cool. I don't know a ton about that, but.
All right. I think we should transition at this point, since we're kind of getting a little bit late into it, to maybe talking a little bit about podcast stuff. Sure. So you mentioned Jay, who's your co-host on the Film Junk podcast. And one of the things that we came up as a question was, you guys are, by all accounts, the longest running movie podcast of all time.
I think so.
It seems to be the case. And so how have you and your co-host managed to stay successful for such a long time? And what systems have you put in place to ensure that you can continue doing that?
Well, successful is debatable if we've been going for that long. So it's definitely, commitment is the biggest factor, I would say. So, no matter how popular it is or whatever, like just dedicating once a week to do that. And sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter, but consistency and dedication to the point where it just becomes like habitual, right? I don't even think twice about it. It's I'm just kind of prepping for it or thinking about what I might do, and you definitely get better at doing it as you go. So just practice, and I don't know, that's about it. I can't think of anything we've done other than consistently like putting stuff out there.
You think almost that you can't help but get better or improve over time?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, definitely editing, even though I'm still guilty of stuff like my own things that I'm bad at doing or stumbling when I speak and stuff like that. You get better at that stuff. But when you edit yourself and edit podcasts, you become more aware of that stuff. And sometimes you can fix it. Sometimes you just kind of are aware when you're doing it sometimes, and you're like, oh, why can't I stop doing that? But you get better at everything. It's like anything. Doing it and putting in hours is really the only way to do it. Like, you have to actually do it.
Nice. Yeah, that's true. All right. Any follow-ups, guys?
I'll ask another question. What's been the most important lesson that you've learned on your journey to being a podcaster and producer?
For me, I would say it's developing a thicker skin. So when I first started, I would take comments very personally. And I mean, I'm kind of digging into another question here, but like the idea of what we want to do on the podcast is, you want some conflict, right? If everyone's just agreeing all the time, it doesn't, in my opinion, what I listen to for podcasts, I like a little arguing, a little conflict, different opinions, and stuff like that. So people are going to disagree with you, and I will heighten my opinions to make it more interesting on the podcast. Like things that at the end of the day I don't care that much about become life or death issues for me in the terms of like how you organize your Blu-rays or something like that. I have they are extremely important and must be talked about for 3 hours at a time. So you have to, people are going to disagree with you, and having the community get involved is part of it. And so, if people don't like you or say stuff, I mean, I've learned to not let that affect me as much, which has helped. And it's kind of freeing in terms of doing what you want to do. Mm-hmm. So you definitely learn skills over time, but that was something that, the sooner you can do that, I think it'll let you be yourself on your podcast, which is always better, rather than being worried you're going to say something that's going to, people are going to, oh, I don't agree with Frank on that or something like that. Like, okay, don't agree with me. That's okay. But I'm pretty open to other people's opinions. It's like, even though I argue on the show, I understand different people like different things. And I'm obviously with any podcast, you're expressing your opinion. And, I'm not trying to represent any movie watcher when I'm talking about it. I'm just talking about my experience and stuff like that. And that's why you listen to other podcasts, to get other people's experiences and kind of see maybe stuff you didn't know about or learn something new. So yeah, taking criticism has been good. And you want to use some of it constructively as well. Sometimes people are right if they're criticizing something you're doing. So yeah, don't get too offended with stuff. People are going after you.
Cool.
Xavier, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, as far as podcasting, like, there are some key factors to it and some things that you could use to your advantage as far as, like, talking and expressing your opinion. And I just wanted to ask, what are 3 things that are necessary to produce a good podcast?
That's a little, I'll try to think of it as generally as I can, because some people like very well-produced podcasts, right? With, it's always under an hour, production, narration, stuff like that, stuff like Serial or, podcasts that have a very specific form. Mm-hmm. Other people like kind of free-flowing conversations and stuff like that. So, but in terms of some 3 things that any of those would probably need to do is, let me think. Things are kind of changing because we do it online now. We used to be a big proponent of being in the same room for conversations and stuff like that, which definitely helps in terms of the flow of things when you're having like very quick conversations. But I don't think we're doing okay without that. So I wouldn't say that's a requirement by any means. So preparation and planning, we do a very minimal amount of that, but we still do some, and we know exactly what we're going to be talking about and try to come up with discussion topics. Putting effort into preparing, so having something to talk about is a huge factor. And probably as a podcast, it doesn't apply. I wasn't even on it when it started, but in terms of if you're going to start a new one, like what is your twist or what's your new idea in terms of podcasting? There's so many podcasts. How are you going to stand out? And to relate it to video games, if we're designing a game, we kind of develop pillars, we call them, or core principles that kind of define the game. So if we're going to work on something, how does it apply to the core ideas of the podcast? So kind of maybe developing what those core ideas are. We didn't do that formally for podcasts I worked on, but we kind of know what they are, I would say.
One of the things that we talk about with our teens a lot of times is that you want your audience to kind of know what they're going to get every week, right? Like if it's chaotic and it's like it's random every single time, then you're probably going to lose people. Are you a believer in that like consistency is the key, not only in the delivery of it every week, but also in the formatting?
Yeah, some degree of formatting, right? Like topics are somewhat similar, and sometimes you can do a tangent, but it's kind of framed in the typical way, like we do organization episodes, and we just did a Q&A for Jay's show that he's worked on and stuff like that. So we do tangential episodes as well, but yeah, having some format is pretty good.
Great.
And we don't even know necessarily what works either. So you have to, like, we've tried messing around with different orders of how we do the show and stuff like that. And I don't know, sometimes that doesn't even matter. So, just trying to think of what you can bring to the table that's interesting. And maybe you're not even trying to find an audience. Maybe it's more for getting better at speaking, or like not every podcast is about being, the number one podcast in the world. It's about, hanging out or putting out some ideas and getting better at communicating, whatever that is. So there's lots of ways to approach it.
Nice.
That's really cool. So you mentioned, Frank, about like the skill of having thick skin. And one of the things that, I think any podcast, if you're with your friends or with people that, you're talking about certain subjects or discussions that have conflicts or different opinions.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've had our share of those moments in our space where someone might disagree on, it's like that debate on Marvel or DC or, just certain video games or just certain whatever topics may be. But specifically for you, like on your show, you and your co-host, don't always agree, right? And sometimes they get into debate. You guys get into debates and arguments.
Yeah. About some of the stupidest stuff ever. How to pronounce words.
I can totally relate. So I think the biggest thing is just like, how do you guys like keep that first under control, right? You don't want to go off the rail and go crazy, and then how do you continue to like stay friends inside and outside of the show?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So we haven't officially discussed it, but just reflecting on what we do and how I approach it, everything we do, well, it's a film podcast, right? Or whether it's a game podcast, whatever. It's all our criticisms and arguments are about like center around film, like how you watch a movie, how you organize your movies, what you think about a movie, opinions on things like that. It's all criticism of basically superficial stuff, right? Like opinions on the movies or games and stuff like that. And any like making fun or prodding is all relating under the umbrella of film or movies, right? So I think we never occasionally adventures into personal, but I personally try not to like get into personal things. It's whatever I'm making fun of has to exist somewhere under the umbrella of the topic of the podcast. Otherwise, it can expand out and just kind of start attacking people and stuff like that. So, I mean, if you have a topic of your podcast, I would say keep criticism and arguments under that, whatever your umbrella is. Because I've never had anything on the pod, like, and again, I'm heightening stuff sometimes too on the podcast. So, sometimes people think we're more heated than we actually are, where again, I want to, elevate and heighten opinions when I'm doing the podcast, but, and just any conversation, I like to be passionate about it. So I think talking about another tip for Xavier, like being passionate is a huge factor for a podcast too. You're passionate about whatever you're talking about and not just doing it because other people, or it's a popular way to do podcasts. Like you can sense the passion when people are talking about things on podcasts. So, but yeah, just, we don't try to get too personal. Occasionally it veers into that, but I try to kind of divert whenever that happens. I'm not I don't really want to go there. So
For sure.
there's never been an argument on our podcast that I'm aware of that has, over, 700 and whatever episodes that is like created a friction or, anger between people outside of the show. And maybe there isn't, I just don't know about it. But for me, that's never happened.
They're keeping it, tucked away, pushed down forever. Okay. Well, I appreciate you being here. We have time maybe for one last question. We don't want to keep you here forever.
I got all the time in the world.
You got all the time.
Nothing going on.
Well, we know you have recording, other podcasts to record and everything like that, so we don't want to keep you all day. But I did want to ask, just like, as a video game developer and as a podcaster, in both of those areas, what do you feel your greatest accomplishment has been in either of those areas?
For video games, I think like designing, being the lead director of design on Embers of Miriam is the thing I'm most proud of. It was a small team, like 4.5-ish people over 2 years, and it's like a pretty 4-hour-ish game, and like the Metacritic stuff is pretty good, like around 78 or 79 last time I checked. So there are obviously people who don't like the game either. I've read every review or any.
Of course you have.
Less now, but when it came out, I saw everything. So the fact that it's generally liked, and I'm pretty proud of having done that, I think is my favorite accomplishment in video games. And for podcasting, this is, again, kind of, we've talked about it, but just the duration and longevity of 750 episodes, and not including other side podcasts and stuff like that. Like, I don't know, it's the dedication is the thing I'm probably the most proud of.
It's impressive. Yeah, I think it's definitely an accomplishment, just doing something for that long. And I think it's something we've talked to the kids about, in the past of, just stick with something over time, and you'll grow something out of it eventually. You're going to find your audience there eventually. So it's a great lesson to learn.
To some degree, yeah.
Either of the teams, you guys have any final questions you'd like to ask that have been knocked out of your brain at this point? Hearing none, I guess we will.
Not really. I've gotten the primary questions I needed, but honestly, it was enjoyable. I learned a lot.
That's awesome. Thanks for joining too. That was really fun.
It was pretty great. Like listening to you talk about like your experiences, like programming, like what you've done, what you've accomplished, how you've accomplished them. I thought that was pretty cool.
Cool. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to wrap it up really soon here. Thanks, Frank, for joining us today. We had a lot of fun. And remember, everybody, we do this Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So if you're hearing this after the fact, definitely look out on our Instagram. We're doing virtual podcasts every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So definitely join us. Look to our Instagram. We'll be able to give you a link to the Zoom channel on that. So check it out. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining in. Thanks, Frank.
Oh, thank you. It was a lot of fun. Nice to meet everybody.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Bye, guys. Thanks for joining us.